Hello everybody, this is Grandma's018 and you're probably very surprised to see me doing this again. I know it's been a long time since I've done recordings for the Stolen Throne, and I'm hoping to finish at least the book at some point, and then I can take a break from doing the readings. The only reason I'm doing this now is because I noticed there were a lot of views on my readings of the Stolen Throne, particularly the first video. And I figured I would at least get done with chapter 8 this time. Hopefully it won't take long. Let me check the time. 8:50? Alright, let's try and keep time on this. Anyway, this is going to be my reading of the Stolen Throne, chapter 7, part 2. Hopefully finishing chapter 8. In the lean 2 years that followed, that was how the rebel army stayed alive. True battles were few and far between, however, and life with the rebels primarily consisted of waiting. Weeks were spent camping in the rain or snowed in during the winter, waiting for the enemy to find them, or waiting for the opportunity to attack. When they weren't waiting, they were trudging through the most remote parts of Ferelden to flee a larger enemy force or to find a new place to hide and wait. Only once did the usurper gain a serious advantage over them. A lightly armed caravan, bringing supplies from Orlais in the early winter, proved too tempting a target, and only too late did Arl Rendorn realize it was a trap. Before the rebels knew it, hundreds of Orlesian chevaliers rode out from the hills, hidden amid the rocks, their silver armor and lances glittering against the snow. They would have flanked the bulk of the rebel force, and pinned it there until more forces arrived, had Loghain and the Night Elves not acted quickly. Loghain and the elves ran into the hills in order to intercept the Chevalier charge. Peppering the knights with arrows forced them to stop and deal with the archers instead of finishing their flanking maneuver. Lightly armored elves were no match for Chevaliers, however, and more than half of them were slaughtered as the Orlesians overran their position. Loghain himself was gored by a lance. Ouch. The sacrifice gave Merrick time to call off the attack on the caravan, and the rebels pulled back to safety. Insisting on going to Loghain's rescue, Merrick brought the rebel forces around to clash directly with the Chevaliers in the hills. The casualties were high, but both the wounded Loghain and the surviving Night Elves were saved before Arl Rendon finally called for the retreat. Chevaliers gave chase, but eventually desisted before the rebels turned the tables. The trap had not succeeded. Other battles were chosen more carefully. Arl Rendon was the one who did the choosing most times, and when he and Merrick would differ in opinion, it ended up as an argument. That's not good. In the end, the Arl's long experience would always win out. These lost arguments were not things that Merrick took in stride. For days afterward he would stay out of sight, spending his time brooding and bristling at the idea that he was not being taken seriously. He complained of being treated like a figurehead, though. The Arl repeatedly told him that this wasn't so. Once Merrick walked in on a meeting of the Arl and both Rowan and Loghain, and belatedly realized that he had not been invited. He spent almost a week, drunk and miserable, avoiding everyone until finally Loghain tracked him down and told him that he was being an idiot, and physically dragged him back to the camp. For whatever reason, this seemed to mollify Merrick considerably. After that, Merrick made an effort to ensure his presence was felt in other ways. Adamant that he would share the danger with his men, he insisted on fighting on the front lines in every battle. The soldiers watched him ride along the front, purple cloak billowing and dwarven armor shining brilliantly, and they worshipped him. He gave no indication if he knew just how much. Rowan got truly upset on those occasions when Merrick was carried in from the field, bleeding profusely from a horrible sword gash. Willem would immediately come running and use his healing magic, even as Rowan shouted furiously. Merrick would grin through the pain and tell her she was making far too much of it. Then Loghain invariably arrived from the battle, still armored and covered in blood and sweat. He would take one look at Merrick, frown thoughtfully, and declare that since Merrick came out of the fight alive, all was well. Rowan would storm off, ranting about their idiocy, while Merrick and Loghain shared a private grin at her expense. Oh boy. The three of them slowly became closer over the 2 years. They fought together in battle, and Arl Rendorn included Loghain in planning discussions more and more. Indeed, the Earl increasingly praised Logain's abilities and once suggested that if Logain's father had been the one to train Logain, it was a tragedy that he had ever left the service of the throne. Things might have been different, the Earl said, and he would have liked to have met the man. Logain accepted the compliment with his usual stoic silence, his thoughts unknown to anyone but himself. With the long week spent camped, Logain devoted a great deal of time training Merrick on the finer points of swordsmanship and archery. He claimed Merrick was a poor student, but the truth was their training sessions became an excuse to spend time in each other's company. Merrick found Logain endlessly fascinating, repeatedly trying to pry a story out of the tight-lipped man regarding his days as an outlaw, asking and insisting until he relented out of pure exasperation. Merrick's endless supply of charm was apparently capable of wearing down almost anyone, and it wasn't long before Merrick and Logain were a constant sight together on the practice field. Nice. Rowan often watched the training sessions, amused by the constant bickering and banter between Merrick and Logain. Outside of the Night Elves, Logain was regarded as a taciturn and even unfriendly man. Merrick had a way of drawing him out, she noted, which she had been unable to do during their months traveling the Benorn. Often she laughingly criticized Logain's sword technique, primarily because it nettled Logain, and thus vastly amused Merrick. Logain became so incensed by Rowan's comments that, seething with anger, he challenged her to a duel to prove which of them knew more of swordsmanship. Grinning, she accepted. Ooh, this could be good. Merrick was incredibly excited by the entire idea and immediately ran about the rebel camp announcing that the duel was about to occur. Within an hour, Logain and Rowan had an audience of hundreds of cheering men. Leery at the size of their audience, Logain turned to Rowan. "Do you truly wish to pursue this?" he asked her, his expression solemn. "I believe it was you who challenged me." "Then I withdraw the challenge," he said instantly, "and I apologize for losing my temper. It will not happen again." Boo! Amid the booms and sounds of disappointment made by the soldiers nearby who had heard him, Rowan appeared nettled instead. "I do not accept your withdrawal," she replied, "provided you fight me to the best of your ability. You want to see which of us knows more how to use our swords better? So do I." Logain stared at her appraisingly, wondering if she was in fact serious. She said nothing, instead drawing a blade and returning his stare defiantly. After a long minute, he finally nodded his assent. Cheers going up from the crowd. Yay! Logain was the stronger of the two, but Rowan was the quicker, and perhaps the more determined. Their initial feints drew loud cheers from the audience, and then they settled into a series of back-and-forth blows to test the other's defenses. Rowan soon realized that Logain was holding back, however, and angrily dived in with a blindingly fast slash, cutting him across the leg. He waved off aid, staring sternly at Rowan for a moment before nodding. If this was how she wanted it, then this is how it would be. The following battle lasted almost an hour, and was the talk of the camp for months afterwards. Logain and Rowan fought savagely, each giving as good as they got, and both of them were bloodied before long. A slash across Rowan's forehead sent blood dripping into her eye and gave Logain the opportunity to go for the final blow, which he took. Only at the last second did she roll out of the way, then tipped her sword towards him respectively. With both exhausted and sweating, a worried Merrick tried to end the duel by calling a draw. Not looking away from Logain, Rowan waved him off. Minutes later, it was over when Logain came in low and unexpectedly thrust up with his blade, disarming Rowan. The audience murmured excitedly as her blade skittered far out of her reach. Instead of giving up and going for her weapon, Rowan dropped down and kicked out with her leg, tripping Logain, and leaped to grab his sword. The two of them fought for control of the blade, rolling around on the ground, their sweat and blood intermingling. Finally, Logain kicked Rowan off, the audience cheering as he rolled after her and sprang to his feet, sword pointed at Rowan's throat. She glanced at the sword, her breathing ragged and blood still running down into her eye. Hang on. I'll deal with that later. Logain was similarly panting, pale and favoring his wounded leg. He held out a hand to Rowan, and reluctantly she took it, allowing him to pull her to her feet. The audience went wild, cheering with approval. They got even louder when Rowan shook Logain's hand, congratulating him. She then wavered weakly and stumbled, and Merrick scrambled to catch her. She chuckled as he called for Willem, telling him that perhaps Logain was a good enough tutor for him after all. Later, as Merrick stood outside the tent where Willem was busy healing Rowan, Logain limped up, freshly bandaged, and stiffly apologized. He had let his pride get the better of him, he said, and very nearly hurt the future queen. Merrick listened, wide-eyed, and then laughed heartily. From where he stood, he said it seemed like the opposite had very nearly been true. Logain merely nodded gravely, and that was where the matter was left. How many more pages do I have left? Dang. I got a lot left. 10 more pages, good God. As spring melted the snow just left by a hard winter, Merrick remarked to himself that it had been almost 3 years since his mother was murdered, and he returned to the rebel army for that fateful battle. As slow as their progress had been since then, the rebel army managed to survive and continued to frustrate the usurpers' efforts to corner and eliminate them. If anything, their numbers had increased. Megrin was a merciless ruler, and the more he taxed and the more he punished, the more the ranks of the rebel army swelled. They reached a size where they couldn't even afford to be in the same region all at the same time. Even with the support of many farmholders, it was becoming difficult for the army to feed itself. So, too, had the risk of taking in information became too high. The speed at which the usurpers' forces found out where the rebels were camped increased with each passing month. The time had come to act. The town of Gorin was a remote place on the southeast corner of Ferelden, past the great tracts of the Brazilian forest. A rough town full of loggers and fishermen, it was accessible to the rest of the country only by boat or along the narrow trail leading through the miles of forest land to the west. It was a defensible place, but all Rundorn had asserted that the majority of its forces were off to the north. Levies supplied by the ruling Terran of Gorin to the usurper to help hunt the rebels. This meant the town was ripe for the taking. Weeks earlier, the Earl of Amaranthine and his men had split off from the main force. He had gone westward to engage in raiding and draw the attention of the king's forces in the region towards him. Merrick assumed he had been successful, as they encountered no pursuit when moving through the forest towards Gorin. By the time they reached the town, it was apparent the defenders had become aware of their approach, but had little time to do more than rouse their militia. A number of the locals had fled on fishing boats, but most were trapped. The assault began immediately. The town was spread along the rocky shore, a veritable maze of cobbled streets and plaster-covered brick. It had no wall, but it did have a stone manor atop the hill that overlooked the town, and that was where the majority of the Terran's men had withdrawn. Merrick and Rowan charged down from the forest and into the town itself, meeting the line of poorly trained militia that tried to keep them out. Very quickly things had fallen into chaos. The militia fell back almost immediately, withdrawing into the alleyways and the buildings, and forcing the rebels to search for them, building the building. Despite Merrick's insistence on not causing more destruction and hardship for the townsfolk, several fires began to spread. He could see the smoke rising, and the panic of the populace made the search difficult. People were running in the streets, fleeing from the rebels and the militia both. They carried the few valuables they could manage and ran for the forest, hoping that the rebel army would ignore them. The streets were a mass of people, all smoke and screams everywhere, and after turning a corner, Merrick realized he was separated from his own men. Uh-oh. His warhorse stamped in agitation, and he fought to bring it under control as a group of people came through the smoke towards him. They halted, terrified. Dressed in simple clothes, many were carrying belongings wrapped in cloth, and several had children hiding behind them. Not more militiamen. He moved his horse aside and waved them by. Tentatively they went. One of the children burst into frightened tears. Aww. More smoke billowed through the streets, and he heard the sounds of fighting ahead. The port was not far away, but he was certain that some of the soldiers would be there. But as he turned his horse about, he found he had no idea which direction that might be. Just follow the smell of salt and fish, he told himself. But all he could smell was smoke and blood. 3 more men came out of the smoke towards him, this time running and shouting. Merrick spun his mount around to face them, and saw that they belonged to the militia. They were armored in dark leather and carried small wooden shields and cheap swords. That they charged at a mounted man in full armor probably meant they recognized the cloak and thought they might drag him from his horse and overwhelm him. Come to think of it, they just might, he thought. He dismounted swiftly and drew his sword, getting the weapon up just in time to knock aside the first man's thrust, but not in time to prevent the man from slamming into him. Thrown back into a brick wall, Merrick had the air knocked from him, even though his dwarven armor took most of the impact. Merrick's horse backed off, but did not run, neighing anxiously. Get on him! Get on him! The man shouted excitedly, spittle flying from his mouth. A fat and balding fellow whose leathers barely covered his belly slammed his sword down to Merrick's shoulder, though it merely bounced off. Merrick gritted his teeth and kicked out at the first man, sending him stumbling away, and then turned and patched the fat man in the face before he could bring his sword down again. Merrick's gauntlet took him right in the nose, and he screamed as blood sprayed out. The third man rushed him, blade ready, but Merrick parried and spun around, then ran him through. The fat man reeled and ran away, covering his face while he squealed in agony. Pansy. Only took a dang bloody nose. Or a broken nose, but still, the other guy got run through. The first man scrambled to his feet and lifted his blade as Merrick turned to face him. For a moment, the two of them stared at each other, their swords at the ready. Merrick was calm, but the man licked his lips nervously and clearly wanted to run. More smoke poured into the street as a nearby roof collapsed and flames licked the sky. "Still willing to try?" Merrick asked. Behind the man, 4 new militia soldiers ran into view. Some were bloodied, and all of them halted as they spotted the confrontation occurring before them. Seeing his comrades, the man in front of Merrick suddenly grinned at him. "I think I just might," he snickered. Then Merrick heard a new sound. Hooves pounding on the cobblestone. The 4 soldiers realized they were being chased and began shouting in fear and running forward again, only not quickly enough. Several horses with armored rides overran them, blades slashing down and dispatching them instantly. One of the riders was Rowan, a green plume fluttering behind her. Oh, Rowan showed up. She rushed ahead of the others, her sword held high. The soldier in front of Merrick stared at her dumbly, his mouth hanging open, and only belatedly did he think to try to run. Too late! Yeah, it was too late. Rowan ran him down, slicing him deftly. Ooh, slit his throat, kind of. Deftly across the throat. Merrick grimly watched the man stumble and then slow, his dark blood gushing over the cobblestones. It was unnecessary, he thought to himself. Those soldiers were his people too, were they not? But there was nothing to do about it. Not yet. The horse clattered to a stop as Rowan pulled up beside Merrick. She removed her helmet, her face covered in soot and sweat. "Fall off your horse again?" she asked with just a hint of a mocking grin. "That's what I do," he agreed with a belabored sigh. He hadn't actually fallen off his horse for several years now. Except for that one time the previous winter when he ended up buried in a snowbank. I'm recording. Then go have Rachel put Jackson down to bed. And then she could take Wyatt. It had saved his life hiding him from the enemy until Logain reached him and pulled him out. Logain had called him absurdly lucky, and Merrick had agreed, through chattering teeth. Logain and Rowan both continued to tease him about it mercilessly. Merrick turned and walked back to where his horse had retreated, taking its reins and calming it before finally leaping back into the saddle. Rowan watched him appreciatively before she glanced back at the horseman waiting behind her. With a gesture they rode off to continue their sweep. "We've still got part of the town to search," she said. "It will probably take the rest of the night to find them. I was hoping they would start coming out and surrendering." She nodded to the various fires around them. "But it looks like they would rather burn half a gourd down around our ears first." "So it seems." Merrick wiped the sweat off his brow. He wiped his bloody sword clean using a hay bundle that stood nearby. "Last I saw, the fighting was going well up at the manor." "I'm busy. I've got a few pages left." "Okay." "Last I saw, the fighting was going well up at the manor. Logain broke through the wall, I think." Rowan looked annoyed as she tended to whenever she mentioned Logain. He mentioned Logain. She had denied doing so when challenged, so now he just ignored it. "So Gorn is ours, then?" she asked crisply. "Soon enough it will be." Rowan waved to her men to continue on without her, and they rode off, leaving Merrick and Rowan to survey the town together. The area they were in had quieted considerably. Several blazes were going, but most of those who had decided to flee were long gone, and most of the enemy in the area had already been found. Merrick felt helpless watching the buildings burn, knowing that the fire would spread unchecked for some time yet. He could see the faces cowering behind the windows, watching Rowan and him as they rode past. But he could hardly expect them to come out now. Later, perhaps, but for now he was the invader, the one responsible for the bloodshed and fires. Perhaps some even believed him to be the villains that King Migran claimed. Most were no doubt justifiably terrified. The streets were strewn with litter, as well as the occasional corpse. Many doors were hanging open or outright demolished, and unsurprisingly, there seemed to be chickens everywhere. Where had they come from? Had someone let them loose? The birds were furiously strutting about the streets as if they were the true owners of Warren now. Oh dear. Thunder rumbled in the sky, and Rowan studied the swatch of gray clouds. "We can hope for rain," she said. "That should help with the fires." There was another sound, however, that drew Merrick's attention. From somewhere nearby he could hear the muffled sounds of a woman shouting for help. "Do you hear that?" he asked Rowan, but she looked at him quizzically. Without waiting for her, he spun his horse about and charged toward the shouting. Merrick heard Rowan's shout of alarm behind him, but he didn't care. Urging his steed forward, he raced down a street cluttered with empty crates. When he turned the corner of what appeared to be an alehouse, he saw the source of his shouts. A beautiful elven woman with long honey-colored curls and dressed in the simple white traveling clothes was struggling wildly as 3 men held her down. Her shirt was half ripped from her body, and only her wild twisting kept the men from completing it. Oh, those jerks. They're gonna get it. "For the love of Maker, help me, I beg you," she screamed. "I'm not gonna yell this," spotting Merrick. One of the burly men slapped a meaty hand over her mouth as the other 2 turned to face Merrick. These weren't his men, and he couldn't imagine them being ordinary townsfolk. Convicts, perhaps? They were certainly filthy enough and had a dangerous look that left no question as to what they intended. Yeah, nothing good. One of them drew a knife. Merrick didn't hesitate. He kicked his warhorse so that it charged the man. The knife-wielding man lunged towards Merrick. His mistake. Merrick turned the warhorse and he kicked the man right in the head and sent him flying, dead before he even hit the ground. "You will leave her be," Merrick roared. He dismounted, drawing his blade to confront the remaining pair as his steed ran off. "In the name of the crown, I command it." The burly man tightened his grip on the elf as she struggled, screaming into his hand. The other man bared his teeth and ran at Merrick, shouting in rage. Merrick did not step out of the way, instead stepping forward and letting the man run into the pommel of his sword. He gasped and fell back, and Merrick swung the blade around to bash the man in the head with the pommel again. He collapsed like a sack. Rowan rode in, leaving off her mount and drawing her sword. The burly man looked at Merrick and then at her, and deciding that discretion was the better option, he abandoned the elf and ran for it. Rowan gave chase, her silent glare towards Merrick saying everything of what she thought of the situation. Yeah, I don't blame her. Merrick went immediately to the elven woman's side. She lay in the street trying to hold the tatters of her shirt together and crying pitifully. Don't blame her. If that had happened to anybody, I think they would be having a similar reaction. Her clothing was filthy and bloodstained, but Merrick didn't think the blood was hers. Other than some ugly-looking bruises on her arms and legs, she seemed unhurt. "Are you all right, my lady?" Merrick realized belatedly that he wasn't sure what one called an elven woman. They had elves in the rebel army, of course, but one spoke to them as soldiers. He'd never had servants, though he'd seen them in some of the castles Mother had brought him to. Still, even then, he'd never spoke to them. The elf looked up at him, tears streaming down from eyes so incredibly green he couldn't look away. "My name is Catriel," she said quietly. "You are too kind, Your Highness. Thank you." With this help, she retrieved a cloth package from where it had fallen nearby. As she stood up, she attempted to keep her tattered shirt together. It was hardly possible. Merrick removed his purple cloak and put it around her shoulders. She stared at him with horror and tried to get away from the cloak. "Oh, no, my lord, I couldn't." "Of course you can. It's just a cloak." "Yeah, it's just a cloak." Reluctantly, she allowed him to close it around her, blushing and looking away. Merrick found himself staring at her neck and how it gracefully flowed down into ample cleavage, only barely concealed by the cloak. She seemed like such a delicate creature. He had heard that elven women held a certain fascination for men, the kind that made them popular in the brothels at dinner. Ugh. He had never been to the capital city, however, and never understood what the appeal could be. Until now. "Ooh, Rowan, you got some competition!" He started as Rowan walked back into view, an annoyed look on her face. He stepped away from the elf almost too quickly, and Rowan's expression darkened into a scowl. "Ooh. This is Catriel," Merrick offered lamely. Then he belatedly looked back at the elf. "And this is Lady Rowan, she is my betrothed." Catriel turned to Rowan and curtsied. "I am grateful to you as well, my lady. I had asked them for help, but it seems I should have been more careful." "I'll say," Rowan muttered, "just what were you doing out here at all?" "I had no other choice." The elf turned to Merrick self-consciously, clutching the cloak tighter around her. "I've been looking for you, my lord. The horse I was given died not far from here. I ran the rest of the way, but then there was so much chaos." Merrick was confused. "You were looking for me?" From underneath the purple cloak, Catriel produced the package she carried. It appeared to be several scrolls bound in leather casings. I came as quickly as I could. I am a messenger sent by the Earl of Amaranthine. Rowan's eyes went wide with alarm. A messenger? Catrill's great eyes lowered nervously. His grace has been defeated. I did not see it with my own eyes, but he said he would hold the attackers as long as he could. He said it was vital that I reach you, my lord. She held up the scrolls again, and Merrick reluctantly took them. She seemed relieved, her charge fulfilled. Defeated? Rowan strode towards the elf in outrage. What are you talking about? When did this happen? 4 days ago, Catrill replied. I sped here on the horse I was given, and it died from exhaustion. But I had no choice. The same men that attacked his grace were not far behind me in the forest. She looked at Merrick pleadingly. I had to reach you before they arrived, my lord. His grace said that was more important than anything. Merrick took a step back, stunned. He opened one of the scrolls and read it, his eyes scanning the contents, even as it confirmed what his sinking gut was telling him. What? Rowan demanded. What does it say, for the love of the Maker? Face paled, he looked up at her. We sent Byron to draw their attention, and he got it. A full legion of chevaliers with mages. The king had to have planned it. And they're coming here? They're perhaps a day behind me, my lord, said Catrill. I wish I knew for certain. Merrick and Rowan stared at each other, unmoving. Overhead, the faint sound of thunder could be heard in the grey skies. Rain would prevent the spread of the fires as in Gorin, though much damage had already been done. Fighting still raged inside the manor, and the town was in complete chaos. It would take more than a day to get the situation under control, and even if they did, the only routes out of Gorin were out the sea or back through the forest toward the approaching army. They were trapped. And that, everybody, was my reading of The Stolen Throne. I'm surprised I didn't cough as much as I did, considering I've had this cough for a while now, and when I talk for a long period of time like this, it makes me cough more, as you probably figured that out from reading my other one, or listening to my other ones. Anyway, that was my reading of The Stolen Throne, Chapter 7, Part 2. And that leaves us at Chapter 8, which I will try and get done at I will try and do at some point, or at least part of it. And I hope you guys have enjoyed it so far. And yeah, it's been a while since I've done this, and I'm glad I finally at least got done with the chapter. I will see you guys next time.